endocrine system. We're just going to do a little flash about the endocrine system. The endocrine system is a chemical control of the body. It's messages that are sent from one organ or tissue to another, each one saying, do this, do this, do this, do this. So it's a chain of reactions that happen throughout the body. Typically, when we're talking about the endocrine system, we're talking about hormones that are secreted by one tissue, gland, or organ, and then are received by another tissue, gland, or organ. And it tells that thing, go on and do something else. We call these local hormones because they're released inside or within the body. Endo means into or inside. So all of these are utilized inside of the body. Remember that the circulatory system here still is a huge part of the endocrine system because of all of the blood that flows through our blood vessels. That what happens is that a gland, tissue, organ, cluster of cells, it secretes something, it goes into the interstitial area or the extracellular area outside of cells, and then diffusion moves it into the blood. The blood then delivers it to the next thing in the chain.
I think we skipped the picture or
Check this too.
it's just asking what's going to transport.
Oh yeah, what's going to transport the hormones?
Okay.
The blood, right? Okay, good. So the blood's going to do the transporting. The cells are going to secrete into, like I said, the extracellular area. Sometimes we call that the interstitial tissue. By diffusion, the surrounding capillaries are going to pick up that chemical message and send it on. Again, you can see I use this picture a lot because it shows you that the circulatory system is in contact with every cell in our body. So very important in being that pathway for things to flow around the body. So hormones, again, they're chemical messages. When we're talking about essentially anything in our body, we're talking about chemical messages, whether we're talking about full molecules or compounds, or we're just talking about ions or atoms. Those are chemicals, and they tell our cells to do certain things. When we're talking about the endocrine system, we're talking about usually glands, but also could be clusters of cells, tissues, organs. Secreted into, as I mentioned, the extracellular fluid in that interstitial area, meaning the places between the cells. So in this picture, you can see here's a cell, and it has produced this purple chemical message. Via diffusion, moves from high concentration in this cluster of cells to low concentration into the interstitial area. Again, high concentration here in the interstitial area to low concentration in the blood, and then the blood's going to carry it to the target cell. Now, one of the things about those chemical messages is that they are shaped in a certain way, and there are receptors on the cells to receive them. So these messages, even though they may be diffusing out as the capillaries or the blood vessels flow throughout the body or reach to other cells in the body, the only cells that they are going to give that specific message to are the ones that have a receptor shaped in a way to bind with the message. So here you can see this is a muscle cell. The muscle cell, it has a rounded receptor. The rounded receptor is able to receive this round message, so that the round chemical message binds with the round receptor, and it's going to stimulate this muscle to do something. Here we have a neuron. This neuron, the receptor, is shaped like a square. So it is waiting for a square chemical message. You can see that this is not going to bind appropriately together. So the messages are very specific to the cells in which they are going to communicate with.
So eventually, do all of the hormones like end up going to all the target cells, or do some of them kind of remain like floating around in the interstitial space?
Some of them will remain, and some of them will diffuse out as they go, because again, diffusion is a property of going from high concentration to low concentration. So even if it diffuses into areas where other cells can't receive them, eventually what's going to happen is that they'll be usually brought back into, so going from like a high concentration here to a low concentration there, eventually they'll diffuse back into the blood, and they'll keep doing this in and out thing throughout the body until they get to the in and out place of the target cell. And any ones that aren't utilized will eventually get filtered from the blood. They'll make their way in the blood in and out, in and out, in and out, until they get to the kidneys, and then the kidneys are going to filter them out into your urine.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so it's not just a simple, like, they all flow directly to the target cell. Sometimes they're going to flow into areas where those cells or other tissues are like, oh, I'm not going to use this. And then they'll go, again, high concentration back into the blood, low concentration. So target cells, again, are going to have very specific receptors to the chemical messages in which will receive them appropriately. And it might tell this specific kind of cell, tissue, organ, gland, cluster of cells to do something, or it may stimulate this to produce a chemical message that then does the same thing. And it releases a message into the interstitial area and travels through the blood until it reaches the next target cell. It's pretty complicated. So we're just showing the basics of it. So here again, you can see if we're talking about like the cells of the uterus being stimulated to do something that goes from high concentration in the blood, low concentration in the interstitial or extracellular area, connects with the appropriately shaped tissue or cell, and it'll stimulate this to do something. Like perhaps maybe it's going to stimulate the uterus to contract during menstruation to push out the endometrium and cause menstruation to begin. Here might be a message that it's the same message that travels high concentration into a low concentration area, and if it is released somewhere, like let's say in the arm, it's not going to stimulate arm muscles to contract like the muscles of the uterus, because the muscles of the arm have a differently shaped target cell, or receptor. Exocrine system. The exocrine system means outside, exo. These are going to be chemical messages that exit the body. So places like sweat, it's released outside of the body, saliva, mammary glands, and a lot of our digestive system glands where we have things that are going to be expelled outside of the body.
So like even though like sweat itself isn't so like is that still hormone related, the exocrine system?
Yes.
Okay.
So sweat's not a hormone, but it is stimulated. You are stimulated to sweat because of a chain of events that says the body is getting too hot. So let's do something to cool off the body. And the end result of this chain of events, we call these feedback systems, which we'll get to in just a second, but this is gonna tell this to do something, is tell this to do something, and on and on and on. And then the last thing in the chain the sweat glands are gonna say sweat because this body is getting overheated. And what sweat does is sweat releases water from your body, and then the water evaporates into the environment, and what that sweat is doing as it evaporates is it's taking heat off of your body with the water. And so that produces a cooling effect. All right, so some hormones. We've talked about some of these, like ADH, the anti-diuretic hormone. When you're dehydrated, it helps you to put more water back into your blood rather than pee it out in your urine. Growth hormones, which we'll talk about. Insulin, which we mentioned with the pancreas, produced by the pancreas, so it regulates our blood sugar. Adrenaline, when you have exams, especially when you get into like finals time, you release a lot more of this. You'll find that usually, especially finals, like the last couple weeks of the semester, you release a lot of this and you're on kind of like a high, you can get a lot less sleep. You also will notice that after finals are over, you usually feel exhausted because your body has been running on adrenaline, and that's not normal. And so when the adrenaline comes down, because you don't have that stressful situation anymore, your body has to kind of replenish all of the stores of things that were depleted during that time. So you feel a bit exhausted, and the replenishment of all the things that have been kind of overused during that stressful time. We'll talk a lot about testosterone and estrogen as well. Here you can see these are all parts of the endocrine system that you have a lot that's being released. Specifically, a lot's happening in the brain. And a lot of our systems that we will have some kind of cell tissue or organ, and they're going to go and contact receptors that are in usually the hypothalamus, and then the hypothalamus is going to contact usually the pituitary gland, and they begin this chain of events, or what we call this feedback system. We're going to concentrate on the reproductive system in this unit. So feedback systems, or feedback mechanisms. When you get feedback from something, you're told, do this. So what we mean by feedback mechanism is, like I've been saying, is that there are these chains. This cell releases something, and it tells the next cell with the correct receptor to do something in return. And then you might have that cell, tissue, gland, organ is going to produce something else, a chemical message, it's going to travel through the blood, it's going to tell the next thing to do this. That might tell the next thing. And sometimes these chains are very long, sometimes they're kind of quick. Negative feedback. In this chain of events, this one tells this one to do something, that one tells this one to do something, that one tells this one to do something. Let's say that you've got 10 in the chain that are stimulated by one after the other, and the last one, the message that it produces, kind of two things usually happen. One is that it does whatever effect the original one intended for this whole chain to accomplish. So it's going to accomplish whatever was desired to be accomplished by the beginning of this chain, and then it's also going to release a message that goes back to the first one, and it binds with the first one and essentially gives a message that says, we did what we needed to do. This chain has accomplished what it wanted to do, so let's stop the chain. Don't go through it again. Yes?
Negative feedback doesn't really mean that it was negative towards the body, right?
No, it just means it stops the original one from going through the chain again. So it's negative, the last one gives a negative message to the first one. But it does accomplish what it needs to accomplish. These are most common in our body because what they usually do is they bring our body back to homeostasis. So like the event of sweating, that your body, when it's overheating, will sweat. Once you are cooled off, you don't continue to sweat. Because sweating, while it can help cool us, we're losing water in the process of sweating, and losing water makes you dehydrated. So we don't want to keep doing that and doing that and doing that. We don't want to overdo sweating because that could cause us to be dehydrated. So sweating, the result is get cooled off. Once you're cooled off, the first one is told, all right, the body's cooled off. We're back to homeostasis. We're not going to overheat. So let's stop losing water. We don't need to do this anymore. So usually, we're getting back to homeostasis through the event of doing one chain. The other thing is that we don't want to keep doing these chains over and over again, because remember that every organ, cell, tissue, gland, when this one produces a chemical message and tells this one to do something, there's energy utilized in creating each chemical message at every stage. So that if we have 10 in the chain, that's 10 different chemical messages that are produced that have to travel through the blood, get to the correct receptor. You have diffusion happening all the way until it gets to the correct receptor. Our body, when we do these feedback systems, our body is using a lot of energy to make all of these chemical messages. So once we get to our set point and homeostasis is achieved again, we get to that set point, we don't want to keep going through it because it uses a lot of energy. So that's why this is the most common kind of feedback, because we don't want to just waste a lot of energy making all of these messages. Positive feedback. It's not as common. Usually we're talking big scale events in the body. Childbirth. Childbirth produces, and we'll get into this when we get into when we get into development, we'll talk about this. So they go through the chain, and the last one's like, nope, we're not there yet. When we're talking about childbirth, the last one in the chain is like, nope, the fetus isn't out yet. Let's try this again. Let's try this again. Let's try this again. And it keeps going for days until that child is born, until the fetus is out of the body. So that's why it's called labor, because labor means hard work. The production of all of these chemical messages are hard work to keep going and going. That's why childbirth is exhausting, because it'll take the woman usually a few weeks to recover from making all of these messages. And then immediately the child's out and they have to go through other kinds of feedback mechanisms like breastfeeding. Then that starts a lot of these feedback systems. One of the things that happens in our world, especially now with the ability to have things quick and easy in our hands so that we can just grab and go, is a lot of the things that we have to make our lives convenient have endocrine disruptors. And what this means is that when we're looking at these chemical messages, and let's say we're looking at this hormone, which has this end shape that's going to fit into the receptor, and you can see these two fit like two pieces of a puzzle, that we have other things in our environment that also fit, but are not the exact same chemical, but they fit into our receptors and they prevent our body from doing what we need it to do. It's disrupting our endocrine system. That's why we call them endocrine disruptor. Endocrine disruptors typically are not healthy for us. Just in the thought about it, they prevent our bodies from doing what it needs to do. In addition, what it can stimulate is endocrine disruption can stimulate our body to have diseases. Can accelerate heart disease, diabetes, cancer. And we're seeing a lot bigger rise now than we ever have seen before of serious diseases in our society, and a lot of that has to do with our grab and go culture. These are all full of endocrine disruptors. You may have heard of bisphenol. There's bisphenol A, there's bisphenol B now, BPA. It's interesting, Canada banned BPA in our baby products. We have recently done that. But also we have other, like plastic products. So, like when I was a baby, for example, I was fed from glass bottles. Now, what do we typically have? Plastic, right? I just went to visit a friend last week. She had a baby, and they had little supplemental formula and plastic bottles. And I was like, ooh, yeah. So right there, on birth, there's all kinds of plastics. Oh, Canada. Where did that spell from? We have other kinds of endocrine disruptors, phthalates. This pH is a, just ignore it, phthalates. Flame retardants, which most of our furniture is flame retardant furniture now. So sometimes like when you get furniture, and then the other thing, like you order a piece of furniture, let's say you order a couch, and it's delivered, and what's it encased in? Big plastic, right? A whole bunch of plastic. And then you open it up, and it has a smell. And then they say now, like, open the windows when you get new furniture, because your furniture has to off-gas. Flame retardants. One of the professors that teaches here, he was a fire person, and when these flame retardants from our furniture burn, they produce more serious chemicals, and he got brain cancer.
So, was there a house fire?
Well, just because he would like, because he was a fire person, like he worked as a fire person, they would go put out fires. And so the burning of things like this from our furniture, that off-gassing of, well, I should say the burning of that produces an even more serious chemical that caused him to have brain cancer, the exposure over and over and over again, over many years.
So it would kind of be better to have a regular couch that would burn in a fire?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it still burns, like, but it might not, like, I mean, and the other thing too is like not many people smoke anymore, so I don't know how much this is really needed. A lot of times too, kids' pajamas are fire retardant.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just teach him to stop, drop, and roll, that's all.
Right? Yeah. So.
My
yeah.
mom taught me that when I was like.
What's over? Stop, drop, roll, and yell now. They say.
My thing is like, if I'm already on fire, I'm already screwed. Forget the pajamas. Like, I'm already there.
Yeah. Paints, sealants.
Yeah, that's
This one, receipts.
really.
Receipts. Receipts have, so if you get a receipt in your hand, receipts have BPA. So water bottles, in the next unit you'll do a exploration of bottled water. Water bottles, or anything that's in plastic, when it gets warmed up, it releases things like BPA, phthalates into the thing you're drinking when it's warmed up. But we usually drink it cold, right? But how it's transported. So we don't think about that they're often transported from different places around the country or around the world. And in those planes or those trucks or train cars, it usually gets warm. And so that leaching, like I would rather go almost get dehydrated before I drink bottled water.
So, like, obviously the bottles, like you're drinking stuff, but like the receipts, like something you're touching, so how does that kind of like get to where the hormone receptors are?
So, receipts have BPA on them. Most receipts. Gets absorbed right through your skin. Skin's really thick. Skin on your fingers especially is really thick. The thickest skin is on our hands, the bottoms of our hands, and the bottoms of our feet. But we can still absorb BPA from receipts at about 300% faster than if you drink bottled water. You definitely, most of us will touch receipts a lot more than we touch or drink bottled water. right? So now, I mean, the good thing is that you can say to a lot of places, like they'll say, do you want a receipt? No. If you work somewhere,
Yeah, I was just about to say, I work, and I have to save all
wear
the
rubber
receipts.
gloves, bring gloves and wear rubber gloves so that you don't touch the receipts. So now I'm seeing more and more in stores is that cashiers will have rubber gloves on. And a lot of times it's like because they don't want, maybe it's like COVID related now, but it really, think about it more so, is that BPA that you're touching. So if you work somewhere, buy some rubber gloves and wear them. Yes, Ed.
So say you have a bottle with BPA and then a bottle without BPA. They make non-BPA bottles, right?
Glass.
So only glass? Cause I feel like I've seen.
If it's
like-
plastic, so yes, some bottles will say no BPA, but it doesn't mean they don't have
Phthalates.
other chemicals in there, like phthalates are usually known.
So the only reason they use it is for the flexibility of the product?
Yeah.
Just 'cause it's easy, but.
Yeah, so the best thing you could do for yourself, instead of, I mean, drinking, this stuff is so bad for you anyway, there's so much. If you start reading about, read about the sugar industry, it's got so much more sugar than we really need it to be sweet.
Or the creation of hydrochlorous.
Yeah, but also the plastic that it comes in, so it's like a double whammy that you're getting there.
myself now for the rest of my life.
Yeah, like my son's so mad because he likes Sierra Mist, and PepsiCo is replacing Sierra Mist with I think it's called Sunny. Is that what it's
Starry.
called? What's it called?
Starry.
Starry. Thank you. Yeah, with Starry. You know what's different about it? The sugar. Sierra Mist was one of the very few pops that had cane sugar.
Really?
Now, Starry has high fructose corn syrup.
That's gross.
High fructose corn syrup, read about that. That accelerates diabetes, heart disease, cancers.
My question is,
It's
though,
cheaper,
What about
by the way.
What about canned stuff?
Canned stuff. So canned stuff, you have to look at the can. Cans have a BPA lining, unless they say BPA free.
What about like a can of Coke?
A can of Coke is better for you. Yeah, so grab a can, then like aluminum usually doesn't leach. Aluminum, like you want to stay away from like aluminum deodorants.
Yeah, I do that.
Yeah, so definitely, there's a lot more in terms of deodorants too. I mean, I could talk for hours and hours about what's in every little thing that goes into your body or on your body and what's wrong with it. Yeah. So all of these, like look at this like cute little white family. They're just having so much fun. And all these things are bam, 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 bad for them. Even your salad dressing, right? A lot of salad dressings come in plastic bottles. So grab it for the glass, or make your own. There's a lot of, like salad dressing is so easy to make, for example. Vinegar, oil, spices, makes a nice salad dressing. We're seeing, in terms of like, there's a lot of exposure with, was it Coppertone last year? That they had a toxic chemical in there and a bunch of other ones. So you want to look for sunscreens that say reef safe or dolphin safe or ocean safe. Those mean that that's good for you. If it's good for the little tiny coral polyps in the ocean, it's good for you. So you want to look for those as well. There's so much to look for. So every industry, look at every industry. Food, just general, driving, heating your home, cooling, things that happen in your food, water that you drink, personal and home care, all of these things, medical care, medical equipment. Think of all the plastic in the medical industry, right? So like a lot of you are going into medicine, think about like gloves, right? Gloves, masks. We've seen that explosion in the last few years, but when you're talking about IV drips, the tubing from IVs. There's a lot of plastic. What do we do with that, right? Plastic will break down into smaller and smaller and smaller molecules, but it never goes away. So we hear a lot more about microplastics in the world also. That's a big issue because we use a lot of plastics. One of the, you can go on the Environmental Working Group. There's a really great website. If you Google Environmental Working Group and you put in, let's say your favorite cologne or perfume or just even your shampoo, and it will tell you all the chemicals that are in there, and it'll give a number code for each chemical and how they, if they're 1 to 10, 10 bad, 1 good, and you can see an overall accumulated number for that product, and then it'll tell you each chemical in there and what each chemical does to you, and it'll even go, you can really get deep into there. For example, fragrance in general is bad. Bad. So a lot of our body products have fragrance because it makes them smell nice. But now we're seeing a lot more essential oil used. So just little things that you're looking for. All right, so in terms of canned goods or just things in the store, you're looking for, you want to stay away from 3, 6, and 7. So on the bottom of any of your products, if you look at 3, you find 3, 6, or 7, those are things that you don't want your food, drinks in. These are not able to be recycled either. They're single use, they go in the garbage. 1, 2, 4, 5 are better for you, and they often can be recycled as well. All of these things you want to look at. Tetra packs, those kind of rectangular packs that a lot of especially nut milks come in or soups come in. Now they're a little rectangular container. You want to look for BPA free lining on those. Most of those do have that. We're going to talk about biomagnification in our society and what that means. We haven't gotten to this term yet. Is that microplastics in the ocean that are dissolved into what we call the phytoplankton layer, the plankton layer, more microscopic, unicellular. We talked about algae or diatoms. But a lot of these microplastics will get filtered into this layer. These organisms will absorb, let's just say visually, this much of those microplastics. These are what we call trophic or feeding levels. So let's just say the herbivores or the vegetarians, that when they eat phytoplankton or these little plant-like materials, the algae, that they're getting for every, the shrimp, for example, if the shrimp eats this much, and each one of these has 1 chemical, and they're eating this many, each shrimp is getting this many chemicals in their body. Then this fish, let's say this fish eats all these shrimp, it gets all these chemicals in its body, and this salmon, now what happens here is once you get up here to this level, this salmon, it is now accumulating the fish's toxins of what it ate and what it ate. So it accumulates, it's called biomagnification, because as you go up every trophic or feeding level, the toxins get magnified. The effect gets magnified. Where you eat, what you eat, could be that you've got a lot of toxins accumulated just from your food. If you are a vegetarian or vegan, you get a lot less chemicals in your body than if you eat meat. You could see that too. In another chain, if we looked at a killer whale, for example, an orca, that higher up organisms in what they're eating, those that eat more meat, get a lot more chemicals in their body. Frogs are a good indicator species because they have that supplementary absorption of air or respiration through their skin, their skin diffuses a lot more things from the environment into them. So usually if things are going weird in the environment, like there's a lot more toxins in the environment, the first group of larger organisms to see the effects on are going to be amphibians. So here, just visually, you can see in this population of frogs, there's something wrong. Also, what we're seeing is in general from all of the different chemicals in our environment, we're seeing reduced sperm counts in all organisms that produce sperm, like humans, right? There's a lot of humans who need IVF in order to have children. Sperm counts are lower. That's a newer phenomenon in humans. This is a feedback loop. So here's a positive feedback loop, that when a woman is breastfeeding their child, the action of the child suckling the nipple is going to stimulate the release of oxytocin, which is carried in the blood, and it tells the brain to continue this cycle. As long as the child is suckling the nipple, breastfeeding will continue. If a woman, like let's say after 8 weeks, or usually it's about 8 weeks of maternity leave, the woman goes back to work and she can't breastfeed during the day, this cycle is going to be less and less. And so her ability to breastfeed may end because she doesn't do it as often anymore. Let's talk about animal reproduction. We're going to focus this on humans because it's very complicated. We're going to focus on two main organs in biological males, the testes, and biological females, the ovaries. We're going to see what happens in testes. There's a release of androgen. It's a male steroid called testosterone. Females produce a little bit of testosterone, some females more than others. The ovaries release a steroid, or sorry, I should say steroids, estrogen, and progesterone. We're going to talk a lot about these. We're going to talk about these in terms of testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, in terms of not only sexual development, but also sexual function. So we're going to explore feedback loops in both of these areas. All right, so puberty. What makes puberty start? The main thing that makes puberty begin is the maturation of the brain. As the brain grows and gets older, the ability to produce in the hypothalamus of the brain, GnRH, which is gonadotropin releasing hormone, occurs. This happens in both males and females. When this happens, depends. A lot of it's genetic in terms of when a child reaches puberty and when the brain begins to mature in this way so that the hypothalamus can produce GnRH. But also, a lot of endocrine disruptors, a lot of hormones in our food also can accelerate the maturation of the brain. So part of our food system in raising cows, pigs, chickens, etc., is that there has been a little bit of regulation on this, but not enough, but especially let's talk about the beef industry, is that the beef industry is still using growth hormones to grow cows quicker and faster so that the person who owns all of those cows that they put into a big factory, they want to grow them fast so they can make quick, fast money. If you eat organic beef, it will not have growth hormone in it. There's also, if you look at the labels in your grocery store, you're going to have just like beef that's just packaged up. It's going to have growth hormone in it, and then you'll see like the sections kind of change. And then you'll have some that'll say no GnRH, or sorry, no BPST and BST. So it'll say no, basically no hormones in it. So you got to look for those terms. And then you'll have organic, which doesn't have that either. So you kind of got those three categories. So even if like, I know it's so expensive, I mean the best thing to do is forget the beef and go buy some like legumes, some beans, some lentils. But if you need to have your beef, try and go for the middle section if you can't afford the organic. And shop and look, don't just be like, oh, I know that's gonna be expensive. Because sometimes the organic may be cheaper, just depends. So make sure you're kind of looking at all of the different things. You also have to look at like per ounce, how much things cost. Because sometimes you'll be like, oh, that's cheaper, but the organic might show a cheaper price, but you get this much, as opposed to the what they call conventional, that you get this much. So you got to think about that stuff. Kids who are raised with more meat will often hit puberty faster. My son is a little on the slower side with puberty because he doesn't eat meat. He's only, ever in his life, he's eaten bacon once in a while. That's it. Other than that, he just doesn't, we've offered it to him. My husband will eat meat, he'll give him some, I'll be like, here, you want this? And he's like, no. He goes for the veggies, the beans, the grains. So
what happens if you eat a lot from the other meat, like with
the conventional meat?
Yeah.
I mean, the growth hormone can mess up, it's an endocrine disruptor. So it can mess up a lot of your systems, but specifically it can make you enter puberty quicker, which let's say that the average age of beginning puberty is 12. You might, if you're a big conventional meat heavy family, you might enter puberty at 10. So it's just, those stages come faster. They also they're seeing some linkage with things like bigger diseases, cancers. Yeah. GnRH will be released from the hypothalamus, goes into the interstitial space. Right next door is the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is stimulated to release LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH, follicle stimulating hormone.
Oh, very good.
Right, follicles. Skin. As Evan mentioned, hair growth. We definitely see an increase in hair growth during puberty.
What is the LH?
Luteinizing hormone. Is it on there?
What is that?
Luteinizing hormone is going to help the reproductive system to begin to produce sperm and egg.
Okay.
FSH also has an effect on that, but the LH, that's kind of its target. LH and FSH are going to travel through the blood. They're going to be received by the gonads, and we're talking about gonads. What we mean are the reproductive sex organs. So ovaries in females, testes in males. It's going to stimulate them to release large quantities of estrogen in biological females and testosterone in biological males. Yes, there.
Is there any like downsides to hitting puberty later?
I mean, other than just maybe like socially.
So, and then there's a bunch of downsides to hitting it earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. I I mean, sometimes genetically, people just enter puberty sooner. A lot of that has to do, like, when puberty is hit, there's a lot of genetic factors, but we have a lot more environmental factors than we ever have before.
So, I don't know what's it called, but those people that can't grow hair at all, they're like completely bald, does that affect like their puberty? Does that affect them?
I mean, I don't know the correct answer, but that's a really good question. And I mean, hypothetically, I would say that they're probably low on FSH, and that you do need FSH for these surges. So that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, hypothetically, I would say, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, or like alopecia, people with alopecia probably have issues, but I'm wondering, like, I know a couple people with alopecia who've had children and didn't have to have any assistance through IVF, so.
Alopecia might be related, though, I guess, right?
It might be a different thing, I don't know, yeah, so, good questions. It's interesting, like we can go in so many directions, right? All right, so male secondary sex characteristics. When we have this feedback loop and there's this big surge in testosterone, the penis and testes enlarge, the hair growth on the body, mostly pubic, underarm, and facial hair, but we definitely see like chest and legs, like kind of all over the body. The larynx, it starts to develop more, so the voice will deepen.
Is that why there's an abnormal? Because they have bigger larynx?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. And muscles will pop, they'll grow larger. I'm sure you've all, like gone away for the summer, maybe 7th grade to 8th grade or 8th grade to high school, and your friend walks up to you and you're like, oh, and they got muscles and a deep voice, right? And you're like, whoa, what happened to you over the summer? My son always says, I'm getting puberty. I'm getting puberty. I'm like, okay. You're getting it. Females develop larger breasts. Hair growth usually limited to pubic region and under the arms. Some leg hair too. And menstruation will begin. What this all essentially means is that when puberty is complete, the person can sexually reproduce. So thinking about the ages that puberty happens, and evolutionarily, like nowadays, the idea of like 10-year-olds having children is kind of absurd, right? But if we go back millions of years, humans needed 10-year-olds to start reproducing because their lifespan may have been tapped out by 27. So we haven't really changed the age, like we haven't evolved the age of puberty with kind of our current modern times. So some of these things, we see that kind of evolution has not selected for that, and it's questionable why. Yeah, like.
Isn't getting like pregnant that early comes with a lot of complications usually though?
Yeah, and one of the biggest things is the body's not big, right? So you need space. The other thing is the hips. The hip bones will kind of start to get larger and open in a way that can allow for the safe exit of a fetus from the body. So absolutely. So that's another weird thing. It's like they're not physically equipped to carry something that could be, if you think about like, let's say an 11-year-old female, if she weighs 75 pounds and she's got to carry about 25 pounds here, that's like a third of her body weight that she's gaining through pregnancy. Is that going to put a lot of stress on her body and probably the fetus growing? Yeah. So it's like a weird evolutionary thing. Thank you for bringing that up, because it's like, we're not ready. We're not ready for it, but we're ready for it.
I know this is too late to play, but the brain maturing, like the body won't grow till the brain is ready for it.
Well, these things won't happen until this part of the brain is mature enough to make the GnRH and the hypothalamus and the FSH and LH and the pituitary gland, and then the testes producing testosterone and the ovaries producing estrogen. So that can't happen, but the brain does mature in a way. Like the brain is always maturing since birth, right? Because we're learning, and but these things specifically at that time. The frontal lobe that allows us to reason appropriately usually doesn't mature until your late 20s. So big decisions in life, should you be making them before your late 20s, like having children yourself, is a good question. Driving a car, a killing machine, a very heavy, 1-2 ton killing machine, should we be driving those when our frontal lobes, our ability to make appropriate decisions hasn't developed enough? Again, it's like things in our society, we don't match them up. They're not matched up appropriately. All right, so a little bit about development. When the sperm and egg come together, and every time, oh, question? I swear I looked at this morning, or yesterday. Okay, if a child develops an anterior pituitary tumor that reduces LH and FSH production, what problems might this cause? I know the answer. Thanks. You can turn around, Emma. Thanks. What do you think? So if they have a tumor in their pituitary gland and they can't produce FSH and LH, can they have puberty? There's nothing to contact the gonads to say, all right, let's continue this on. So A is correct. Oh, sorry. So development. When the sperm and the egg come together and they form one cell, and that cell cleaves into two, the result of cleavage is the production of a hormone called CG or HCG, which is human chorionic gonadotropin or chorionic gonadotropin. So with every cleave, meaning every time cells replicate, they produce CG. So 2, 4, 6. So there more and more and more is being produced with every cell cleaving. So every cleavage produces more CG in the female's body. The CG does a whole bunch of different things. 1, it makes the endometrium, the lining of the uterus, what is shed during menstruation, thicker. The endometrium, the point of every month having endometrium, what's shed during menstruation, blood and glands and energy, is that gets thicker once a month to hypothetically receive a growing embryo. When there's no growing embryo, the body responds by flushing it out. The uterus contracts, females get cramping, and it pushes out the endometrium, and they have menstruation. And every month it's like, okay, let's prepare, maybe it's gonna happen. Nope. So the endometrium has nutrients, glands, blood, squishy stuff. It's like, hey, here's a nice safe home. The point of the endometrium is to nourish the growing ball of cells until a placenta can be formed and there can be a blood-to-blood connection between the mother's growing body and the growing fetus. In the meantime, everything comes from the endometrium.
So, in bio, when we were talking about how a lot of miscarriages can occur from like chromosome disjunction and stuff like that, would another reason for one maybe be like if genetically your body isn't like, you know, creating the little helpers that are gonna figure out if there's a blastocyst in the endometrium or not? Those are the reasons why you might have a miscarriage.
There's so many reasons, but yes, so like perhaps you don't have a lot of CG receptors. And if somebody doesn't have a lot of CG receptors, that could cause them to always have miscarriages because they can't detect that ball of cells growing in their endometrium. So that's one reason why someone could have consistent miscarriages.
And would that end up being genetic, like genetically your body's just not producing enough receptors or the receptors are dysfunctional or something?
Right, correct. Could be genetically that someone doesn't produce enough endometrium every month. Could be endocrine disruptor issue. Yeah, so there's a lot of categories of why miscarriage occurs. 1 in 5 pregnancies result in miscarriage. We do not talk about that enough.
Wow, that's a lot.
1 in 5, 20% chance every pregnancy of having a miscarriage. A lot of women who have had miscarriages, so, and it's very difficult. Ali, did you have a question?
No.
Okay. So CG is going to have that, I like to call it beef it up, make a nice home. Beef it up. The CG, after it has been released from the receptor, or receptors I should say, in the uterus, it gets filtered out in the mother's urine. Pregnancy tests. On a pregnancy test, it essentially works similarly to how our immune system works. This is also similar to how COVID tests works, is that there's an antigen and an antibody, and when they bind together, it tells you positive. So when we're talking about the CG is like the antigen, and there are antibodies on the pregnancy strip, and when the antigen and the antibodies come together, it's going to trigger color change, or even now the strips will say positive. There's ones I'm hoping they got rid of them. There's ones that like have a smiley face or a frowny face, which I'm like, not everybody's happy about that or sad about that, right? So that's a weird one. COVID test works the same way. COVID is like the antigen to an antibody for COVID on the strip, and it triggers a positive change, which you see it as like, could be pink versus blue, or purple, or 2 lines versus 1 line, whatever it is.
So basically, you're only gonna be spilling CG into your urine if the blastocyst of like the fertilized egg is embedded in the endometrium, and that is producing all the CG?
Is present. Sometimes, so ideally it's embedded in the endometrium. Sometimes it will get stuck in the fallopian tube.
Oh.
And that's what they call an ectopic pregnancy, where the pregnancy develops in the fallopian tube, and like a female can start having really bad pain in her side. And usually when the pain develops, it means that that has grown enough that it could rupture the fallopian tube. It can be very dangerous for a woman.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes they don't know until, could be like 8 weeks, 12 weeks. And then just think about legislation nowadays. If that needs to be removed after some, like Florida's saying 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, you can't remove a fetus, a growing embryo, I should say, a growing embryo, even if it's life-threatening. If you have an ectopic pregnancy, you have to wait till you're almost dead.
You'll have to carry as a term.
You could be dead because it could be viable in there and it could kill the mother. But this is still alive, whatever, I don't know when life starts, but then it could kill someone. So there's reasons why we have legislated things in certain ways, because there are dangerous situations that can occur. Well,
I was just gonna say, like, how does birth control work, like, chemically or like?
we're
in
gonna
the
get to
body?
that, so that's a really good question. Yes, we will get to that. So again, you have a trigger between the antigen and the antibodies on the strip that's gonna cause the strip to do something. That's going to say, and you have to read the directions to know what the triggering means if the test is positive versus negative. Pretty clever, right?
Yeah,
Again,
that
like-
is pretty cool.
right?
I never knew how it worked.
Yeah, yeah. So I always tell the story, my best friend, she's like super type A. She is like one of the most organized people I've ever met, super driven, created her own company with 3 kids and takes care of her whole family. So when she wanted to get pregnant, she'd be like, oh, so we tried last night. And I'm like, okay, great, I know what that means. And she said, so I'm gonna go get a pregnancy test today. And I was like, it doesn't work that way. Because it takes about 12 days for the CG to build up enough to be detected. And I'm like, you gotta wait at least 12 days. Before that, usually doesn't trigger the positive if you are indeed positive and pregnant. And she's like, no, I'm gonna find out today. And I was like, yeah, no. You can't.
You're gonna be disappointed.
Right, and I was like, you can't. She goes, I will find out today. I was like, no, you won't. In 12 days, you will find out.
You're gonna find out today that you're wrong.
You're right, disappointment, as you said, right? Like, until day 12.
Yeah.
So she spent a lot of money on pregnancy tests. All right. Asexual versus sexual reproduction. We have 2 different kinds of reproduction of cells in our body. Asexual reproduction is when you don't use sperm and egg. Asexual, non-sexual, no sperm and egg together. There are some advantages, it's super simple. So like mitosis in our body is a form of asexual reproduction. It helps us to grow, develop, maintain, and growth, development, maintenance, and one more thing. You don't need a mate. You don't have to go find somebody to have mitosis, right? Your body just does it. If you're a single-celled organism like bacteria growing, you don't need to find a mate, you just grow if it's a good condition. You don't have to spend time making sperm and egg. You don't need all of those chains and those feedback loops to make this, to make this, to make this, to trigger sperm and egg to be made. So there's a lot less energy utilized. You need a lot less structures. It's super duper simple. The biggest disadvantage is that your cell makes a genetic copy of itself. So, I mean, granted, not no, but mostly no genetic variation, unless of course there's mutations that happen by chance of copying of the cell, but for the most part, there's no genetic variation. You get a copy. So natural selection is out when you're talking about asexual reproduction, which if everybody is exactly the same, if the environment changes, everybody can die off. So like mitosis-wise, it's fine, but if we're talking on the species level, like bacteria, archaea, some protists who only do asexual reproduction, if the environment changes, the whole population can be wiped out at once. A couple of examples in higher organisms that do asexual reproduction. These are pretty wild. This is called budding. We saw it with yeast. If you remember back when we did fungus, that yeast made a bud. They made a genetically identical copy of themselves, and the bud started to grow out of the parent cell. Hydras, coral, polyps, they do this. Look at the little bud, it's so cute, right? But it's genetically identical. Typically budding, larger organisms don't do this, especially organisms out of water, because gravity, the bud would start to get really heavy, and you'd have to carry bud around, and you go through the door and you bang bud's head, and you don't want to do that. So in water, you could be like no gravity, and you're just floating around in water, and bud, here is bud, and bud is weightless to you. fission. So I know Amelia, you had mentioned this, that flatworms, if you cut them in half, the top half will grow a bottom half and the bottom half will grow a top half. Some worms, not all worms,
I went
flatworms.
on like a canyon tour once, like it's like to Sagwa, the forest preserve, and I actually saw these like the planarians. I saw the flatworm. This is like the one time I saw flatworms in person, like live ones in person for myself. We went to the the canyon, and there was like clear still water, and I saw the tiny little flatworms, and I saw the heads, and I saw like the eye spots. I'm like, oh, those are planarians. I immediately recognized them.
Cool.
I was so excited to see those because I
In the wild.
love the weird biology. So.
Yeah, they're pretty neat. The last one I want to mention is called parthenogenesis. This is one of the ways that bees can replicate or reproduce. The female, from unfertilized eggs, create offspring. They can also sexually reproduce. Let's talk about sexual reproduction. Yeah, you got it. Oh. Okay. Given the obvious advantages of asexual reproduction, why do you think many animals have evolved capacity for sexual reproduction? What's the answer?
C.
Good, C, genetic variation. All right, sexual reproduction specifically, we're talking about when a sperm and egg come together. Doesn't sound very sexy, does it? No. So it's super weird, right? Like how, just think about like our society, we haven't made the process of digestion sexy. Imagine if, like, and this is just such a like arbitrarily weird thing, think about it, is that in our society, if we were like, made pooping and peeing hot, as opposed to sexual reproduction, it's just a system.
That's fair.
It's
like,
just a biological system. Why do we choose this one to be the sexy one? Breasts are for feeding babies. Why are they hot? Ask yourself. Why are they sexualized?
Because I'm like, damn girl, you can raise my kids.
I mean, that's like inherently that, right? But
like when you were like, oh yeah, look at that whale with legs. He ugly. I'm gonna go with the other whale that's gonna give my baby no
right,
legs.
right. So weird. We are really weird in terms of what we have said in our society is beautiful, sexy, what's valued and not valued.
Well, it's like when the medieval times where they're like people who weighed a little bit more, they were like, damn, you cool because you can afford food.
Yes, exactly. So
In terms of like dental related things, I am not that sexy. I had to braces twice. I had two baby teeth that wouldn't come out, so they had to be pulled out. And this canine here, it was actually growing like sideways, and I had to have surgery to have it pulled down to grow properly. So yeah, so I'm definitely not having children because I don't have to go through the same pain I did.
So that's kind of the interesting thing, right? Like the questions you really should be asking and finding a potential mate, and especially if you're hoping to have children, reframe that to what really should be important. The person who's gotten into 18 car accidents,
No.
probably is not a good decision maker. Do you want to put your kids in that car?
Okay, I have a question for you though. Did you do that when you were picking your husband?
Yeah, I asked like, I asked things like, I would ask people like, how many wisdom teeth do you have? And they'd be like, why? And I'm like, how many car accidents you got in? How much credit card debt do you have? How long did you go to school? Do you have student loans? Yeah.
Would be if I got this picture, I'll be like, I will drop you by the next stop sign.
Right, you're like, oh, I gotta call. Hello? And then it's like, meh, 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 meh.
Oh, my skin is pricey too. I had to go on Accutane 2 times because it's actually, it is genetic. Like, it wasn't because, like, I take really good care of my skin, and I always have.
Right.
But I got it, like, from, like, my dad. Like, he had, like, that acne when he was
And
younger.
what does acne
And
matter?
I did too.
What does acne matter in terms of survival, children? Should that be a factor in beauty that we focus on?
It's natural.
And Accutane can prevent you from having successful births.
Yeah, I actually.
So why are we focused on that? You know, there's a lot of things in our society that we're like, why is that? Who cares? Who cares?
Yeah, I remember when I was on that medicine. Yeah, I've never had sex before, but I had to take pregnancy tests to prove to the law that I wasn't like pregnant while taking medicine because it's guaranteed to like cause like birth defects while
Right.
I'm on it.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, and there's sometimes that, like you'll be at the doctor and they'll say for biological females, like, I have to give you a birth control test before we do this. And you're like, but there's a reason for it, right? So, sexual reproduction, it's the opposite of asexual, right? It requires time and energy, and then it requires the time, not just to find a mate, but an appropriate mate, the better mate, the whale with no legs mate, right? Not the person with the perfect skin and the abs and the muscles and, you know. The advantage produces genetic variation. So, sexual reproduction can be pretty wild. Like, we know how it happens in humans. If we are looking on coral reefs, for example, in the water, a lot of organisms in water will just spew their eggs and their sperm and hope for the best and hope that their same species is doing it, that if a female is releasing her eggs, that, I mean, you know, they don't have a brain, they're not hoping, they're just like, I'm gonna pop out my eggs. And if a sperm from the same species gets together, and then not only in water, they might get together, but then they gotta find an appropriate place to settle down and attach so that they can survive. It can be very difficult. A lot of species in water will trigger the ability to release sperm and egg at a full moon. Oftentimes at the warmest point in the summer. So midsummer, there's a lot of, like at the full moon, that you might have 3 months of like spewing of sperm and egg by all kinds of organisms. So there might be a ton of sperm and egg in the water of different species, and then they gotta like, sperm and egg gotta bump into each other. Okay, so eggs. Oh, no, we're not gonna get eggs. One thing I do wanna just go over real quick, the female reproductive system. So just pay attention, please. Don't start packing up, please. Just, okay, female reproductive system is very differently designed than the male reproductive system. So in this area, in the urogenital area, you've got 3 systems that are releasing in the same place. You've got the digestive system, from the anus is releasing feces. You've got the urinary system, which is releasing urine, and then you also have the reproductive system. Because all 3 of these are together, it makes for a higher chance of diseases to be spread in this area. So as simple as, you know, maybe like little kids, you know, when you have especially females, you have to make sure to teach them to wipe from the front to the back. Because urine is mostly sterile, so it's okay to get urine over the vagina, but if you wipe from back to front, there's a lot of bacteria in the feces, and you could get feces or bacteria from the feces into the vagina or into the urethra, that those bacteria could cause diseases in those other 2 tubes. So it's very complicated in terms of everything that's merging in one area. This is called the pubic bone or the pubic symphysis. It protects all of these tubes. It's in the front. you've got the urinary bladder, and you've got the urethra. The vagina, the cervix is the bottom of the uterus. You've got the uterus. The uterus is mostly muscle, and it has a thin opening. Inside of there is where the endometrium develops. The muscular part of the uterus is called the myometrium. Think of like muscle. It begins with an N. So when you're looking at all of this, the uterus, it has two parts. Myometrium and endometrium make the entire uterus. So when you're labeling that in lab today, you will have like this and this make this thing. Make sure you label all three of those. You've got the ovary, and then you've got what we call the uterine tube. We can also call it the fallopian tube, or we can call it the oviduct. So it has three names. At the end of the uterine tube or the fallopian tube, you've got these little, like, doesn't it look like little hand is holding on to the ovary? Those are called fimbriae. And what happens is that when you have ovulation and the egg, it actually bursts through the wall of the ovary, the fimbriae sweep it, and then there's little fimbriae inside the fallopian tube that sweeps that egg into the uterus. There's the clitoris here. Clitoris is a big bundle of nerves. And then anus, and you've got the rectum. And then the spinal cord is in the back. So it's kind of like the end of the spinal cord. The end part, the very tip of it we call the coccyx, and the end of it we call the sacrum. This protects all of this on the back side. The pubic bone or the pubic symphysis protects all this on the front side. So we've got this kind of like bone protection here. Let's take a quick look. There are questions. Okay, so this is an ovary. This is an entire ovary. What you're going to look at today is you're going to see that the eggs, we're going to call them eggs. We don't officially call them eggs until after they're fertilized. So we really call them oocytes. O-O-C-Y-T-E is oocyte. So all of these little oocytes, as they get closer to the part of the ovary that has ovulation occur in it, near these are the fimbriae at the end of the fallopian tube, you'll see that more and more, so like the little purple things are the oocytes. As they get closer to that top of the ovary, and it really is like kind of I guess it's the top, they get more and more cells. The cells are called follicle cells. So here's another kind of way to think about follicular skin layers or protective layers, like our skin is protection. So these protective follicle cells or follicle layers, you can see more and more developing. And you also have follicular liquid. So while this looks like it's empty, it actually has liquid that's full of nutrients in it. So that when there's ovulation, this can help to keep this, when it's fertilized, going until it gets to the endometrium. So what you're looking for is you're looking for this, and you're going to label this. This is what we call the base. The base is kind of like what connects where the oocyte is to the outside follicle cells.
So all those oocytes, are they like embedded in the ovary, or are they shown in space?
They're all inside the ovary. Yeah,
Are they like embedded?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And we have millions of them, and all of our oocytes are developed before we're born.
Then how
So
do
in the
they-
fetus, they're there.
And how do they move to how do they move to release?
That's a good question, is that what I really think happens is they're not moving as much as the ones that are up here. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Because, yeah, like the ones down here would never get to there. So I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure how. One more thing, I'm gonna show you the male real quick. You know I love to keep this going. Okay, so you're gonna look at sperm underneath the microscope too. The sperm only has 4 parts, and we'll talk about why that is next time. The head has the nucleus, and it has enzymes in it called acrosomes. It has a mid-piece that has a ton of mitochondria in it, and it's got a tail for swimming. So 1, 2, 3, 4, that's it. Sperm are very simple. We'll talk more about why next time. And then just last thing is the male reproductive system is a little bit different, or I should say a lot different. We do see the spinal cord with the coccyx and the sacrum, the anus and the rectum, and then everything else beyond that is kind of weird. You do have the pubic symphysis here again. You have the testes and the epididymis inside the scrotum. A tube comes out of the epididymis. It's called the vas deferens, and it goes up and over the urinary bladder. It comes past 3 different glands: the seminal vesicle, the prostate gland. In the prostate gland, from the urinary bladder, the urethra and the vas deferens merge. So here's where we have 2 systems coming together in the prostate gland. It doesn't happen like that in the females. We have 2 different release points. You have what's called the bulbal urethral gland, or the Copper's gland, and then the urethra comes out of the penis. The penis has cells on either side of the urethra that can fill with blood to cause this during sexual reproduction to become erect and then be easier inserted into the vagina. So these cells are what we call the corpus spongiosum. They look like sponge. These are the corpus spongiosum. Sorry. Corpus spongiosum on this side and a little bit on that side. These are the corpus cavernosum. I think like the boxes are caverns, little caverns. So corpus cavernosum, corpus spongiosum. And I think I hit everything there. Okay, so let's go to lab. You're going to work on lab 32 today.